Hi, and welcome to the first webinar in our Enterprise AI Maturity series, Enterprise AI Maturity. This is the first of 4 webinars, and the following 3 will dig in a little deeper on subjects that will come up through the course of this one. I'm John Burke. Hello? I'm John
We
Burke,
can hear you.
CTO of Nemertes, and with me today is Johna Johnson, our founder and CEO. For those of you who are not familiar with Nemertes, we are a research and strategic advisory company that is focused on finding the value that organizations derive by deploying emerging technologies. And so our roster of coverage areas is continually evolving, and you'll find us discussing evergreen subjects like automation, along with very new things like AI in the enterprise and quantum technologies. This is me. I'm the one with the beard on the right side of the slide, and on the left, that's Johna. She'll be taking over and doing most of the presentation after we get a few housekeeping bits of information out of the way. Our recently completed enterprise AI study involved detailed interviews with people at 28 different organizations across more than 8 verticals, including 7 companies in financial services. The median employee count was a bit over 23,000, and the median annual revenue, so half above, half below, roughly 7.8 billion annually.
And before we jump to the next slide, in case anybody's curious why we pulled out financial services and nobody else, our main reason for doing that is that we work with quite a number of financial services firms. And as the chair of the Wall Street Technology Association, I tend to be involved with a lot of them. So they asked for a split on their own. So that's what we decided to do here. So that's just why we pulled out that one vertical and not any other particular vertical.
Thank you. As you can see, we got a fair number of companies in the research, education, and consulting parts of the economy, and then a fair smattering across high-tech companies working on the hardware or the software or the services side, logistics companies, construction and real estate companies, very interesting segment of the economy currently, especially energy companies, media companies, and again, a smattering of others that we group together as other. Now, in looking at the research results, in addition to the overall data that we'll be presenting, we will be comparing the responses of different groups of participants based on one of 3 axes, one being the organizational culture around IT. And we have 4 gradations of that, ranging from the conservative companies that basically only deploy technology to reduce their costs in some way, or to do something they're required to do by law, and the technologically aggressive or leading edge companies that look at technology investment as something they do to gain a strategic advantage, to maintain a strategic capability, and therefore they look at it very differently from the cost cutters. On the size spectrum, we're currently mostly looking at size by revenue, or for nonprofits, annual operating budget, with small and mid-sized companies divvying up the space below the $1 billion mark, and above $1 billion with large and very large companies. So we'll typically divide between the smaller and the larger in comparisons of their approaches to AI or their experiences of AI. And lastly, and this is a new categorization for us, and one that fell out of looking at the data in this study once we had it all lined up and in front of us, we're looking at highly productive organizations versus all others, where highly productive organizations have revenues in excess of $1 million per person, per employee at the company, that is. And again, we're looking for the differences between what they do with AI or what they've experienced with AI versus everybody else. AI is often seen as something that could be a dramatic boost to productivity. So we're very interested in how the companies that are already highly productive are dealing with the advent of AI in the enterprise space. We also have a whole split for financial services companies. I don't know that any of that data will actually be in this deck, but it'll show up down the line.
Yeah, we have a few. We'll highlight them, but I explained why. So
yeah, and it's been interesting around the subject of AI that the folks who classify themselves as aggressive in technology or leading edge, that they have typically been the early movers in any major new technology space. But in this case, that was not what we saw in the data. So it'll be interesting to look at those culture splits when they come up here. And with that, I believe I'm going to hand off to John.
great. Thanks, John. And just a reminder for folks who just joined us a little bit late, the emphasis for this research series and research study is on enterprise AI. So we're not looking at what everybody and his brother is doing with AI. We're really specifically looking at what the enterprise stance is towards employee use of AI and towards business use of AI. So we ask people questions. And we got some very interesting answers. So these are all direct quotes because we interviewed everyone and asked very open-ended questions. But, the guy in orange said, well, AI may change what people do, but we don't believe it's going to reduce headcount. Now, remember, there's a huge fear that AI is going to decimate jobs, particularly white-collar jobs. And this guy's point is, you know what? They've said that about every technology since 1975, actually since mainframes in the 50s, and it hasn't happened. I don't see how AI is going to be any different. By the way, if you disagree with that, come join me on LinkedIn because we've got a lively debate on that exact topic going. Somebody else said, we were terrified of all of the, AI is going to take over the world, but we had the same fears about the internet and we were able to sort of more or less organize around it. So if we can build ethical intelligence, machines will be ethical. I kind of think that's a big if, but okay, it's a position. I like one of the folks we spoke with said, you probably want to think in terms of ideation being commoditized. And that sounds like fancy consultant words, but I think this is really, really important takeaway, which is this. If your job involves coming up with lots of different ideas, largely by putting together existing ideas, your job may be on the line. If your job involves deciding which of those ideas are the best fit for what you're trying to do, probably not. Or another way to look at it, AI may put writers out of business, but it creates a boom in the need for editors. And we'll hammer on that a little bit more as we go through the series, although not so much in this episode. Somebody else says it's like the Wild West. People are deploying without thinking about consequences. And that's true. I mean, we've seen it. We're probably going to get unexpected issues in society from privacy violations, crime. We haven't thought through all the consequences. I completely concur. And furthermore, I've talked about the impact of AI in things as random as gas station heroin. So yes, I've actually issued an advisory to our clients, gas station heroin, AI, and you, talks about why there really is a connection and it is a problem.
Even that there's such a thing as gas station heroin. Yes, that was.
Yeah. So just a side note, we're talking about stuff that's legally sold over the counter because they take something like heroin, tweak 2 molecules. Now it's not illegal anymore, but it has essentially the same effect, although nobody's really studied it. So God knows what you're getting. And it's sold as a supplement in a shiny red canister or whatever, something very attractive. So yeah, be careful about supplements you buy in gas stations is all I'm going to say. Somebody else says AI is going to reshape the skills we have in our organization, how we work, how we interact, how we serve clients. We're going to see need for continuous learning, much faster cycle time. Hold that thought, as we're going to see in our second episode, not this episode, but the second episode. One of the top benefits of AI is reduced cycle time, improved speed of whatever it is you want to do. Faster is usually better, but it's not always better. And we'll talk about that in the third and fourth episodes. Other observations, I don't know about the guy in green, but I find that less than an overwhelming endorsement. At Tesla, Musk uses AI to make decisions. Gee, I wonder which AI told him it was a great idea to buy Twitter and call it X. But, okay, so maybe think about AI as decision-making. Lots of folks have talked about AI as digital customer experience enabler. Usually Usually they've found that where it really works is in making the actual human who interfaces with customers much more intelligent and aware, rather than replacing that human with an AI, because
Right.
truthfully, none of us really want to interact with a chatbot. I personally want to take a club and club the stupid chatbot. They keep saying things like, "It seems that you're interested in X. Is that correct?" No, what's correct is I want to clobber you and talk to a human. So, but I'm a curmudgeon. Um, but not just the neurolinguistic aspect, also how do we make engineers better? How do we better validate the code, but the context and the intent of the code? The bulk of time that's wasted in IT is not in configuring the devices, but in the change management process itself. So to the extent that AI can help with these kinds of processes, you're going to see real improvement in AI. And then somebody else, last but not least, the person in baby blue is saying, the overall concept is good. I like where it's headed. It's just not there yet. So, with that, let's talk about it's just not there yet. I'm going to go ahead and introduce, or for many of you, reintroduce our or our maturity model. We have a standard maturity model that goes from unprepared to reactive to proactive to anticipatory. So essentially, the difference between unprepared is we're just not ready to cope. We have nothing that we need, whether it's technology, people, or even the ideas about what we might need. Reactive is we can react to business requirements and requests from stakeholders, but we can't figure out what they're going to ask. So lots of times IT departments think they're doing very, very well because they're highly reactive, because they react very well, but they're not really getting ahead of the curve ever and seeing what the business is actually going to ask. That's where proactive and anticipatory come in. And the difference between proactive and anticipatory is proactive is you've got the platforms, the structures, the people, the organization, the processes to address current issues and challenges. Anticipatory is all of the above for addressing future issues. So, for example, somebody might have all the requisite AI teams and digital ethics programs and governance in place to handle AI, but have they thought about the combination of AI and quantum computing and what that will require and what changes those will require to the current state? If they're doing all that, they're in that golden land of anticipatory. So you'll notice there's some little icons here. We use these icons throughout. You'll see them on the next slide. The little chevrons are the aggressive folks that John mentioned. These are the folks that view technology as an enabler. And to a very large extent, the story of enterprise AI thus far is the story of how aggressive organizations or organizations with an aggressive IT culture got caught flat-footed. And I'm not dissing these folks, but essentially these are companies that are so comfortable being on the cutting edge that when ChatGPT hit the universe about a year ago, they were just stunned because they didn't expect a user interface to have such an impact as it did. But it really did have that impact. The globe is all organizations. So on average, we would say based on, and we'll show you the details in the next slide, most companies are somewhere between reactive and proactive when it comes to AI. It's sort of on the edge. Interestingly, the highly productive companies, those little gears, are farther into the proactive. The financial services firms, who tend to be larger but also more conservative, tend to be even more proactive still. And most interestingly, AI is one of the few technology areas where bigger is better. Larger companies, by definition, are higher up on the maturity model. Now, your first question is probably, yeah, that's great, Johna and John, but what exactly are you measuring to get to this maturity model? Glad you asked. This is what our maturity model looks like, and let me explain all the stuff in the column to the left. First step in maturity is that you're using the technology. And by using the technology, we mean currently using the technology, not planning to use the technology really soon. So when we looked across all companies, we found that 61%, 60.7% were using it today, all companies in our study.
And
Yeah,
furthermore, using it in actual business
enterprise.
for the
Yeah,
organization, not just
correct.
dinking around with it and seeing what's what.
Exactly.
Yep.
And we very specifically said we're not asking if the employees are doing it on their own time. We're asking, as an enterprise, are you using it?
Yep. It's out of testing. It's in production. Yep.
Right. So the aggressive folks, a little less. Larger folks actually were considerably more likely to be using enterprise AI today because if you think about it, a large company has lots of lines of business. Usually, at least one of them is doing something with AI. And the story of enterprise AI is also largely the story of lines of business diving into it. Interestingly, those productive companies are much less likely to be using AI, largely because they don't have time. And what I mean by that is, by definition, productive companies run very lean because they generate a lot of revenue per employee, or alternatively, have very few employees involved in generating revenue. So they have an awfully tight structure with a lot of automation, a lot of narrow focus. They tend to be extremely good at focusing. And so they literally don't have the extra bandwidth to go dinking around with new things unless the business value is clear. And then financial services firms, who also tend to be larger, are much more likely to be using AI. I'll stop there, John, and see if there's anything you wanted to add on that using enterprise AI today.
No, no. I mean, there's some interesting detail, but it comes out later about what they're using it for. And so we can obviously poke into that when we get to the use cases.
Exactly. And the use cases actually are going to be in episode 2. So we're not trying to tease you that we're going to be talking about use cases in this episode. We're just giving you the sense of maturity. The next thing is we asked if they're using AI within the IT department and within a line of business, depending on, whatever your organization is, the line of business may mean something different. And essentially the percentages continue to track with the same, aggressives a little less likely, everybody else a little more likely, but it's running at about 75%. In case you're wondering how 75% can be using AI within IT versus just 60% using it overall, obviously this is of the people who said they were using AI, where are they using it? So that's where that came from. Then the next question we ask is, both within IT and within lines of business, do you actually have a team? So essentially the questions go, are you using it? Where are you using it? Do you have a team of people to support it? Interestingly, we're still at about 60% here, a little bit less for within AI and a little bit more outside within IT and a little bit more outside of IT. And then we mentioned the use cases. The one overarching use case is using AI to enhance internal operations. Most folks are doing that. Interestingly, the productive guys, of the half of people that are using enterprise AI, 100% are using it to improve their internal operations, which is kind of interesting. And that leads us to, that's a pointer to how to think about enterprise AI. We also asked about a digital ethics policy. We'll go into that in greater depth in upcoming episodes, but essentially a digital ethics policy is about knowing your stance on intellectual property, on exfiltration, on data leakage, as well as things like bias and protection of employee and customer privacy. Because one of the scary things about AI is that privacy suddenly disappears in a puff of smoke. So a digital ethics policy is articulating the company's stance on all of that, hopefully having mechanisms to enforce that stance, but not necessarily, at least having a stance. What's fascinating to us is fewer than half of organizations even have a stance. Yeah. And that gets back to what that one person said, my gosh, it's like the Wild West. Because if you haven't even thought through what privacy means in the context of AI, what bias means in the context of AI, what exfiltration means in the context of AI, you better think about that right away.
It's very scary values of interesting, this interesting data point, that the peak is 50%. Is scary.
Yes. So what we did in constructing our maturity model, we said, listen, to be mature, you have to have the technology, you have to have a team supporting it. You have to have a team within IT supporting it, a team within a line of business supporting it. You need to be using it within IT. You need to be using it within a line of business. You need to be using it for the primary use case that everyone agrees on. And you need to have a digital ethics policy. And oh, by the way, we don't yet know which one of these is more important than the others. So we'll just do an average as opposed to a weighted average. That average is what gives you the placement of those little logos on the previous slide. So as you can see, aggressive folks are slightly behind everybody, all companies, and everybody else is slightly ahead, with large companies very much farther ahead. Now, you may point out that that's the most simplistic maturity model you've seen. Possibly it is, but I would argue that's about as sophisticated as you can get right now, given the infancy that we're in with AI. So then the next question is, which AIs are they using? Now, I want to highlight that we asked this as an open-ended question. And what I didn't do, we did also ask if they were using specific LLMs. So we did focus very much on generative AI and LLMs, but we also asked where else they were using AI. And I just want to highlight that a number of organizations said things like every cybersecurity product today has AI built into it. So of course we're using AI. So we're not tracking that here, but we're aware that it exists and we have data on who's using it, who's using AI in cybersecurity, for example. So with that said, I think the most interesting thing is it's almost, if you think about this as a cluster, across all companies, large companies are most likely to be using everybody on this list, with the exception of Bloom and Hugging Face. By the way, Hugging Face just got an enormous investment from, I want to say Amazon. I forget who it was. But one of the tech firms just gave them like $10 billion or an insane amount of money. So what's funny is nobody's using Hugging Face, but they probably should start given where it's likely to be going.
Yeah, one of the things that's good to note here is that the llama line
Mhm.
is one that we also expect to grow alongside Hugging Face in the future. Hugging Face is sort of a clearinghouse for llama/alpaca based models and systems and tools, and those are the ones that have the potential to be deployed on endpoints, Macs, PCs, even mobile devices. And we know that's going to be of huge interest. So we're expecting a big spike in participation and use over the course of the next year.
Yeah. And unsurprisingly, pretty much half of all folks are using ChatGPT, OpenAI, Microsoft tools. Also, interestingly, we won't share this here, but in an upcoming episode, 25% of organizations say they're actually planning to ban it. So even though they're using it, they're planning to actually ban it because they're scared of it. Last but not least, I find it fascinating that NVIDIA, which was really kind of the flagship AI company for many years, is used by relatively few compared to ChatGPT, and even Google Bard, which is quite interesting. So yeah, I would say this is informational rather than recommendational, because what some people are doing today is not what they say they're going to be doing tomorrow, and what they're not doing today may be what they're doing tomorrow. So we didn't
Oh,
really. Oh yeah,
I can say on that point too, it's important to distinguish between NVIDIA chips and NVIDIA's AI
correct.
platform.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah, we weren't asking about chips. We were asking about the enterprise AI
right.
software that they have. So with that gives you a sense of where everybody is. I think the next question that you might have is, well, for those who are using it, what are the use cases and what are the benefits? And John and our colleague Jerry will talk about that in our next episode. And then what are the downsides? And finally, the question that's on everybody's mind, is it going to take everyone's jobs, or more broadly, how is it going to change organizations? So our next 3 episodes are the good, the bad, and the ugly, as John will point out. So with that, John, I have a couple more slides to share the findings. So, these are the key findings, by the way, from everything that we had, in the detailed deck. So these are things that we haven't yet touched on. But as I mentioned, the primary benefits of AI are agility and speed and streamlining operations. As we saw, large organizations generally tend to be the best prepared to handle enterprise AI. They tend to have familiarity across a range of products and services, teams, a governance framework, and they're using AI to manage internal operations. As we mentioned, the aggressive folks are least prepared at the moment. Something we haven't talked about but will is that most organizations are not using AI to enhance internal operations outside of IT, meaning things like marketing, legal, HR, and finance. They probably should be. So our clients are coming to us saying, help us develop and deliver an enterprise AI service. And we're working on that with a couple of folks today. The big thing that I'm seeing, the 2 things that are coming together that's actually very scary, is that almost everybody's using AI in some form. But as you saw, almost nobody, well, only about a third of folks have any kind of defined digital ethics policy. More to the point, organizationally, there are no enforcement mechanisms for a policy, even should one exist. So normally, if IT has a policy on, say, data exfiltration, IT owns all the tools that manage data exfiltration. They go out and they buy tools. They worry about securing the perimeter of the enterprise. They're the control point. If lines of business, as we'll see, lines of business are launching AI initiatives without even involving IT, how can IT enforce any governance? And in fact, there's no consistent AI police across the organization, and no organization that you can charge with that other than possibly compliance, which is great if you're a robust, mature organization and you have a robust, mature compliance operation, but most companies aren't and don't, so that could get very scary. So that's something that leaps out. John, anything to add before we turn this into some recommendations and news you can use?
I just want to point out that last bullet point, the difficulty of policing not just the humans who are using AIs, but in the future policing the AIs themselves, and the fact that as much as they're unprepared to deal with the people, they're doubly so because they're not used to having to think about agency and choice in the software, and that's absolutely something that's going to have to be addressed in those ethics policies and other policies and governance frameworks for AI.
Yeah, an excellent point. I'm glad you highlighted that. So, boiling this all up, what should you do? First of all, you should have organization-wide governance and policies dealing with things like uh, what is the enforcement mechanism and what are the enforcement groups, and also expand your ideas to think about, as John so perfectly put it, software with agency. Because right now, software sits on your desktop or in the cloud or on your server and doesn't do anything unless you tell it to. In the future, it will be off merrily gallivanting, doing stuff unless you tell it not to, and ensure that it doesn't. So, enforcement. Uh, as we mentioned earlier, IT should be developing service offerings to deliver AI to other groups, particularly but not exclusively the back office teams. By the way, if you're tempted to standardize on a particular vendor, don't. This field is moving way too quickly, so have multiple efforts underway at once. And if you're looking for immediate bang for the buck, look at using AI to automate in things like standard administrative departments and tools that can do one-shot, low-shot learning and have been specifically trained for that problem domain so that you can really streamline and speed up operations. John, anything else to add before we wrap up the webinar?
Just that there's a bit of a dilemma embodied in that last bullet, that the tools that are best able to do one-shot, low-shot learning so far have also been the ones that are most capable of telling you things that aren't true and then producing lots and lots of supporting evidence for the thing that they've just made up out of whole cloth. So there'll be a fine line to walk in pursuing that.
And fun story on this, I was talking to my 96-year-old mother about AI, who was using AI to write her memoirs, despite being a complete Luddite who can't work a cell phone. And I told her about hallucinations, and she laughed delightedly, and she said, "Oh, they're just like a little child." And in fact, that is a good way to think of it, which is when a child makes something up, it's adorable, it's not evil, because it's an exercise of imagination, and you know this child will grow into being able to tell truth from fiction. At least most of us can most of the time. And what we found with AI today, at least, is if you tamp down that ability to generate hallucinations or play pretend, you won't get very effective AI. It becomes less and less efficient. So that's that balancing point, that conundrum, that is the big part of the reason why I say AI really creates a boom in the need for editors, because you have to do quality assurance on the output. And with that, John, I think I will hand over to you to kind of wrap it up for folks who want to know more about enterprise AI, our series, our research, or us.
And thank you. And we do have one question lined up in the Q&A. And everybody else, if you've got questions, drop them in the Q&A right now while I'm walking through the boilerplate bits. And then we'll do Q&A at the end before we go. So to connect with us, if you check in the attachments, you should see attachments for connecting with us in LinkedIn, for example, and a link to take you to a form to apply to join our online community. We have an online community that is private, so it's closed community for enterprise or organizational IT leaders and professionals and technologists, people in all all verticals, I guess, as well as in the military and amongst first responders. We have a fair number of folks in as well. You guys can connect to each other and you can connect with us. So if you're interested in connecting with Nemertes, please do sign up for the community. We'd love to see you there. And as Johna said, we have 3 more sessions planned for this series on the enterprise AI research results. The next episode, which is in 2 weeks, roughly, is episode 2, The Good, Enterprise AI Benefits and Use Cases. After that, a couple weeks, episode 3, The Bad, Enterprise AI Roadblocks. And finally, episode 4, Enterprise AI, Will It Steal Your Job? That's the ugly episode. And I'll tell you in advance, it's actually not that ugly. But everybody has their concerns. So with that, we will take questions. And first question, Johna, is it's interesting that enterprise AI teams in LOB are higher than AI teams within IT. Is that driven by CX use cases or by something else?
Which is a great question. Thanks very much for asking. It is, I would say yes. And CX being customer experience for folks who aren't aware. Yes, I would have to go back and double check to see if folks are more likely to mention CX in lines of business. But it's not exclusively CX. So we actually have a whole laundry list of use cases that show up in lines of business. So while I would say there's definitely a sub-focus on customer experience, there isn't also that it isn't exclusively customer experience that's driving it. Even, lines of business that are not necessarily customer focused are also very interested in supporting and using AI. And John, I think you just extended the talk, but it looks like we don't have any other questions at the moment. Of course, as you mentioned, please do check out the links that are associated with this webinar so you can join the community, so you can register for the upcoming webinars. And also, if you want to come find us and pester us on LinkedIn, all of those are attachments to this particular webinar. So hopefully this isn't the last you'll see of us and the last you'll see of us on this topic. We would love to engage you on that. And with that,
thanks all.
All right. Take care.
Bye.